podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Well, hello there. You look nice today. Look at you with the blazer and everything.
Thank
Hat.
you.
What the heck
No
is
hat.
going on?
I hosted a webinar today with Dr. Bridget Whaley from West Texas A&M about her findings around phone-free schools and perceptions of teachers, and it was great. And I am in total Zoom uniform, which is looking great up here. Maybe wearing just
Are you in your underwear?
pretty raggedy pants below.
I've done the same. I've done that multiple times.
Yep.
The Zoom uniform.
Looking good.
Yeah.
The Zoom uniform. Yeah.
I'll share one more thing. I know you're doing all these other things and it's just on my mind. Dee Dee is working on something called Project Glimmer, which is collecting, basically there's these people that will donate makeup and makeup artists for kids for the prom that she runs at both hospitals for the kids.
Yeah. I love it.
And then the other is called Project Princess, which is about dresses that are getting donated for kids who are going to go to the prom. And I'm like, she has one called Project Glimmer and one called Project Princess. And I'm like, I seem to get Project Grumpy Teacher and Project Sad School. Why did I get Project Sad School?
No, I call it Project Sad Trombone. You want to know what our theme song is? Were you the one who told me to read the Rigorous Hospitality, or what's the book?
No, that's interesting.
Unreasonable Hospitality.
No, I don't know it.
Oh, you should check it out. He's into hospitality, restaurant hospitality, but he started to really think about how do you give people this remarkable experience? And he said, we started doing these convenings, and the first year only restaurant people came, and it was great. And then as we continued to do it, all of a sudden, like business people were coming and schools were coming, like all these different people were like, no, I recognize that this is what is going to make the difference for my community, whatever that community might be. It's like, how do we make sure that the people who work here are just to the next level of hospitality? And so I appreciate the book because it does speak about that. I do think you can get to the point where it's just like, no, the customer isn't always right. Like at some point, but I'm still working on it. So we'll see where it takes me. Listen to every idea. The first time someone comes to you with an idea, listen closely, because how you handle it will dictate how they choose to contribute in the future. That's so true. Sometimes I'm like, that's stupid, we're not doing that. And then they don't come anymore.
That's funny. Yeah. I mean, even just like the t-shirt that says, be kind.
Yeah.
God, all you have to do is say, hi, good morning. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about Dan James today. First of all, we have a former U.S. Olympic coach here.
Cool?
That's super cool.
In fact, it's so interesting because the way he talked, you're like, oh yeah, no, you're a coach. I felt like motivated by him. Yeah. I was like, put me in. Coach.
Well, he also I'm like, oh, I haven't never seen him speak, but I'm like, oh, I've seen guys like this guy speak at our conferences. And you always coming away going, yeah, let's do it. We all could do this. We could totally do this.
That's true, because there are some that are the worst who are like, take out your phone and think about somebody who inspired you and go text him right now and you say, you made a difference in my life. And then who made a difference? He did. That's right. That's good. And you're like, what's your number? I want to text you something. Sorry.
Put your number up on the slide.
It's so funny. Yeah, actually, because it's funny because I'm reading this book, Unreasonable Hospitality, and this would fly in the face of, what are you doing? Why are you being such a jerk? You know what? See these moments and embrace these moments and make the intentional effort to raise that level for that person in terms of being seen and feeling valued and honoring and all those kinds of things. And I totally believe in that. I definitely am a New Yorker when I'm in some of those things that were like, take out your phone and turn to the person next to you and show them a picture of. No, I'm not doing that.
I mean, like sometimes this is where you and I are so different. This is where we just veer as a pure Californian.
It's like, I know I'm not wearing a hat.
I would love to.
So do I go Islanders or do I go Mets in this moment? Because that's who I am.
Yeah, goodness gracious. Even as the Sharks fans are like, sure, if they win, great.
Well, wait, I went to a Islanders Kraken game, and the Kraken fan was giving me a hard time because the Islanders never seem to win here in Seattle. And then by the third period, he goes, hey, you seem like a nice guy. Can I get you like a beer? I'm like, no, you're supposed to. I wore my Mike Bossy jersey. Like, you're supposed to give me grief. That's fine. No, don't be so nice right now. That's not unreasonable hospitality. We're at a sporting event.
I like your commitment to your New York identity in these specific spots. That book makes me think of the work that, or at least the language that I use around the concept of audacious goals, and that it's just better when we think about goals that are really out there. And it does make me think of Dan James. He basically talked about this idea of leadership through purpose and impact. That's how he framed it. And to me, I'd say that's the why of it. But the way it was different this time for me listening to him was about setting these goals, or these basically not settling for okay, pushing to the limit, like thinking about what the kind of place you want to create. And that's your goal. It's not, oh, we wish we could.
Oh, I
but
understand.
rather,
yeah. It's, well, you call it audacious and I may call it aspirational. It's like you may not get there. You're on your way there every moment of your day in terms of the actions you take. As you will hear in our conversation, I reveal what is in terms of the ultimate impact. What do I call it? Moral focus, but what is it that I live each day to try to achieve? And it's a wildly audacious goal, as you would say, and one that we hope that everybody would want to aspire to, but that's my goal. So anyway, I'll just leave it at that as a teaser so that when people come in and they listen, they'll hear it.
That's great. That's good enough. Let's get going. Listen for Peter's inspirational goal. Would you call it here? I don't know if you'd call it a goal. I think you call it a
moral
purpose,
focus.
Really.
Yeah, moral focus. All right. So before we get in there, remember, as school leaders, many of us move from being experts in one area to leading systems at scale. And you'll hear Dan James, our guest, talk a little bit about that. And because our sponsor is IXL, they will remind us that it takes good information and the right tools to be able to achieve that. And that's where IXL can help. It's a personalized learning platform used by the top 96 of 100 districts to support student growth and give educators clear, actionable insights. So if you want to learn more, visit ixl.com/imperfect. You are listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Mansan. Here we go.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dan James, founder of Story 19 Consulting. Now, before doing his current work, Dan spent 16 years as a U.S. Paralympic coach for wheelchair tennis, an experience that shaped his deep understanding of leadership, of communication, and of human potential. Dan, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Oh my gosh, Peter, thank you so much for having me. This is truly an honor.
I'm really excited to talk with you, and it's so nice to meet you, and I'm grateful to my friend Dave Buck, who heard you speak and said that we should connect. So thank you, Dave. I know you listen to the show. Thank you, Dave. I loved visiting your website. I loved listening to some of the conversations you've had with others about your work. And it's this that told me that we'd really enjoy getting together. It's Dan helps technically minded professionals translate their brilliance, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. But I just wanted to get out of there and say, that is so cool. But I first want to think about the purpose of this podcast in particular, which is about extending leader longevity. We know from Rachel White's work at the University of Texas, Austin, that superintendents nationally, they only last about 3 years before they start looking for new jobs. And that's even less if you're a leader of color, if you're a woman in leadership. And so with that knowledge, one thing that leaders need to think about is really deepening their ability to share leadership. And I read that you believe leaders should empower independence rather than control every move, which I do play some tennis, so I was thinking about that as well. I actually, as a side thought, who is it, the coach of the Golden State Warriors? Steve Kerr. He has all of his players read this book about tennis that
Game.
I think that's right.
It's a great book. It's an amazing
It's not too
book.
big. I read it once, and I've also listened to him. He talks. There's an audio version of it as well. It's pretty fantastic.
I think it's from the 80s, Peter.
Yeah, it's not a new book, but
it has stood the test of time, which has so many implications about human psyche as much as we've grown and developed, that procedurally in thought process and the way we take in emotion and process that into action is still meaningful in the same way it was when that book was written. So it's really an incredible book.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I remember one of my big takeaways was the sort of imposter syndrome voice that we hear in our heads, and how, so that was one piece. And then there are components that you can turn into somewhat a muscle memory, which in the leadership model that I subscribe to, it's this nested pattern of that there are patterns to behavior and there are patterns to reactions and interactions, and that you can do them. So at any rate, I do want to get into shared leadership though. In any system, and of course, school systems. The language or coaching moves can really help a superintendent encourage that kind of autonomy for their principals, autonomy for their district leaders. And I just wonder, what advice do you have for leaders who are really engaging in that kind of work?
I think the first is to just assess how you are engaging your teams. There's an automatic assumption from both sides of sameness. And yet the art of being a subject matter expert in teaching is vastly different than leading a school system. And there is a disconnect, whether it is business, school districts, sport teams, in the leadership model and the subject matter expert model. And one of the really important things, whether it's longevity, scaling success, creating a healthy environment, is to bridge that gap, to develop a level of understanding so everybody is meeting in the right place.
I want you to expand on that just a little bit, because if I understand correctly, so many of us have been content experts, and then we're thrust into these leadership positions. And in some cases, you're going from maybe a classroom of 30 to all of a sudden a school of 300 to then a district of 30,000. And what works in one place in terms of maybe relationship doesn't necessarily work when it comes to systems thinking. And I imagine all the different people that you coach and support have to be thinking about the systems they'll build and the feedback loops, or it goes down to, I don't know, part of me thinks it goes down to trust, but then also, as you started your answer, it made me also think about their individual values versus the collective values that they're going to then assign to themselves or agree to.
I think it's really interesting that as people become leaders, and as people are leaving from subject matter experts or SMEs, they don't understand the difference to doing versus leading. And I find that in every industry I work with, that the transition from an individual contributor to a leader, there tends to be a gap. And in my very honest assessment of myself, when I went from being a tennis coach to a leader, I never bridged that gap. And I can say with all honesty, in my first 3 years of high-level leadership, I was really imperfect. And so to look at that and say, okay, I need to bridge that gap with everybody, right? And so we do that on a 4-scale model. We start as leader of things, or as an individual contributor, a teacher, right? A coach, whatever that is, but we're contributing directly. Then we become a leader of the individual contributors, or leader of people. That's your principal, right? Leading the teachers and making sure that the classes are on board and we have a collective. When we get to leader of scale, which would be a superintendent, we talk about cascading leadership, where my direct touch isn't as big as it used to be with a classroom of 30, but the cascading effect of that is 30,000. And it's really important that as we make that transition, we understand that bridging that gap and creating that skill is more than. It's an additional skill that has to be done in order to create impact at a leadership of scale level.
I think what you've just said is beautiful, and it is totally, you've put words to my rambling about going from 30 to 300 to 30,000 is exactly that. I think the downside for any of us who have moved into the role of the cascading leadership is we sometimes lose connection with the people most impacted by decisions because we're at this level. And when I think about shared leadership, and I imagine you would ascribe to this idea, is how do we keep dipping down into and making sure that we don't lead by title, that we're leading and serving as a lead learner with people as opposed to leading through directive?
I find your term serving to be really apropos here, because as a leader, we are serving those we lead, but we're also serving those we are impacting. I do an exercise with everybody I work with, and I ask them, what is your ultimate impact? Not in your job and what you are. What is your ultimate impact in this life? So that I always keep a connection to the impact I'm making to the end user. So for me personally, my ultimate impact is creating vehicles to help people find their best self. That applies in every area of my life. And so I'd ask all the leaders, what's your impact?
I love it.
What is your actual, now what are your results? What is your next referendum? Why? What is the impact you're trying to create? And if you can have a relationship to that, that why is also a little bit of retention. It's inspiration so that there's always a why in the job you're doing.
And it's focus. I mean, we call it,
100%.
in the leadership model that I use, we call it moral focus. Why do you get up in the morning? It's not because you were trying to pass a levy or you were trying to implement a reading program. It was, what is your moral focus? And for mine, it has always been to end poverty. To whatever degree that I could use my influence, affluence, whatever it is, how I might be able to take advantage of the blessings I've been born with and to share them not in any sort of as this benevolent, but rather really to disrupt the system so that we all have an equitable chance, whatever that might mean and however that might look. So I appreciate that you brought that up.
Well, I love that, because as you look at this, perhaps the most base, simple statement a person can make, I'd like to end poverty. How much can filter down below that? How many action items, how many choices, how many relationships? And the beauty of that is that becomes the beacon. Why am I doing this? To end poverty, to create the best self for every individual.
Yeah.
And that's the beacon in our choice making, in the way we develop systems, because that's the impact we're trying to make.
If you're just joining us, our guest today is Dan James, the founder of Story 19 Consulting. And in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there is a dimension called the leader's learning work. And inside that dimension, there's a term using the power of language. And Dan, your work is, as we mentioned at the top of the program, it's really about helping technically minded professionals translate their brilliance. And essentially, you're leveraging the power of language. And I imagine you use framing and scenario building and metaphors and storytelling. You've said that everything we say is a story. And I just love that idea. Superintendents have to do something very similar. They have to take complex data, policies, budgets, and they have to make them understandable for their community, for teachers, for parents, and for students who will one day inherit their system as parents themselves. So I guess there's a big question, but what might be some advice that you give leaders on using language and storytelling to really bridge that gap?
Peter, if I'm honest, I have a huge advantage, because in working with technically minded people as a former tennis coach, I get to very authentically say, hey, I don't get it. Please talk to a tennis pro. But really the advice is, the advice becomes one of, can you get to 50,000 feet? So stop getting granular at the beginning. When we start talking about buy-in and alignment, it doesn't start at the granular level. It starts at concept. It starts at 50,000 feet. Can we align on the impact of whatever the subject matter is? And now if we can align on that, I'm interested in delving down into the details. But as communicators, I have to start and assess my audience. And I mean, you might find this interesting. I've outlawed outlines in my life, and I do impact lines. So in every speaking engagement, podcast, difficult conversation, what is the impact I'm trying to make? And I start there. Underneath that are stories and information that can support that impact. That might get into some detail, but it always starts at 50,000 feet with the impact and an assessment of audience.
All right. So my co-host, he listens to my conversations and then he gives me grief for questions I didn't ask. So I can already imagine that Jamie's going to ask, what was the impact statement that he wrote for this podcast conversation? What was something that you thought about in terms of inline?
So it's funny, I was actually doing it right before we went on.
Yeah.
Because I do go through that. And I mentioned to you before we started recording, my father was a superintendent. And so this is...
So you and my son can get engaged in some real therapy about being a superintendent.
Please give him my number. We need to talk. But it is really a lot of my coaching and education philosophy comes from my parents as a teacher and a superintendent. And the impact I really wanted to make was to convey that people in academia, any level, can be great leaders, can create scale of impact to children from every level. And that really was the impact I wanted to make today, to say that is possible in the healthiest and most longevity style way we can. And
I think that's going to totally resonate. Sorry to step on your words.
You know, you're good.
One of the things that I ask every guest each week is to tell me what they think about the term an imperfect leader. And I think this is a really nice sort of pathway from what you've just said in terms of the inline you want to have, and then also potentially what that term means to you. So how does that term resonate for you?
First, I identify with it. As I look back on my career, especially as a coach, I am coaching on the things I failed at and in the things that actually pushed me to get better. And so in my practice, we do not talk about perfection or outcomes. We talk about the pursuit of better. And so we get rid of those outcomes. The outcomes are an ancillary benefit of a process of getting better. And we measure the process, not the outcome. And so as we talk about it, an imperfect leader is always growing, is always getting better. Do they skin their knees? Do they make mistakes? 100% yes, and thank goodness they do, because it is those skin knees that make them better. And so to me, if there is such a thing as a perfect leader, it lives in their imperfection.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention An Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
This is Greg Meyer, Jamie's partner at APC Leadership Collaborative. Superintendents know that school principals are the single biggest lever that any school district has for improving student joy and success. Unfortunately, there's very little professional development for the specific things that a principal has to do to improve their school. At APC Leadership Collaborative, we specialize in coaching principals to take on audacious goals, build their leadership skills, and make big improvements in their school. If that inspires you, let's connect and talk about how we can collaborate. Find APC Leadership Collaborative online at apccolab.com.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. And my guest is Dan James, the founder of Story 19 Consulting. Now, in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then what did they learn from it? I might add that I'm excited to talk to you because this is, you've said that failure is the only real vehicle for growth. So that is exactly what this segment's all about. Dan, what happened?
Peter, I feel like you're putting me on the spot to talk about how I failed. And the biggest challenge with this question is choosing which time. And so one of the things I look at in terms of my own growth is the understanding of the difference between resume and team. And I think one of the bigger mistakes I made was to hire an incredibly talented person who ticked every box in the job description, but in my heart of hearts, I knew wouldn't fit in with the environment we were trying to create. And I hired that person anyway. I want to stress that is not that person's fault. They were incredible, but they didn't fit in to what we were trying to create. And it created discord. And instead of moving us forward and scaling outcomes and improvement, it led to extra debate, disagreement, discomfort. And as talented as that person was, it actually hurt the growth of our team rather than helped.
Wow. I will tell you, superintendents who listen to this program each week will often, I'll get some feedback that say, I need to hear some HR versions, some HR ones. And it's always difficult because you want to honor and respect and value the person that, that is the subject of the conversation. At the same time, you can speak broadly as well as some specifics. And so as we go through these questions, I'd like to think about, so what got overlooked? And when I ask you that, I'm also going to follow up with, how do you know when it is not a good fit, or like you needed that person to be the agitator for change? Because sometimes status quo is what you're trying to disrupt. And so it sounds like in this sense, not a good fit was everybody, you knew where you were going. Everybody, you were clear on your moral focus. Everybody was moving that direction. And this individual, while had lots of the technical skills, didn't have the cultural piece that supported that work moving forward. What got overlooked?
I think the value of culture, the value of alignment to an end. And we talked about earlier in the podcast, we talked about ultimate impact. Every team has an ultimate impact. Every person has talents in different pathways to get to that ultimate impact, but it still has to be the same ultimate impact. It still has to be the same outcome that we're all striving for. And as a leader, you strive for different ideas and you strive for other people's brilliance. But alignment on the end goal has to be constant. And when we overlook the culture of process is going to be great, but alignment on the outcome, maybe not. I want to stress that doesn't mean having to pivot or change in the midst of what you're striving for doesn't occur. It means you do it together. And so if someone comes forward with a better idea, you embrace it, you give them credit, and you celebrate it. But you're doing it in a manner that is aligned and positive.
You had said something earlier about, you said, we measure the process, not the outcome. The outcome here was what wasn't ideal. It wasn't satisfactory probably for the individual either. Nobody feels good about it not working out. So you're saying we measure the process. So in this case, you had to revisit the process you used for recruiting and interviewing, I assume.
But 100%, Peter. And I have, in my practice, I have something I challenge all my leaders with called the mirror test. And so when something goes wrong, or clearly not the direction that we perceived it would, what's the first thing you do? And as a leader, that's look in the mirror. What did I do that put us in this position, or what could I have done differently to avoid this outcome? And it is okay to look in the mirror and say, wasn't me. But in this instance, as I looked in the mirror, it was 100% me because I ignored the value of the environment that we work in.
So that's typically the fifth question. What could you have done differently? As opposed to no. So let's just jump there and then I'll ask you a different question after that. But what could you have done differently?
I think that what I should have been measuring the process before the interview in the correct questions. What skills does this person need to have? Absolutely one of the right questions, right? What experience does this person need to have? How do they work? Who are they as a human being? What do they want? And I didn't ask those kinds of questions. I asked the qualification questions. That was it. And so what I would have done differently has been very open to discovering how they work with others, what they actually want out of this position, what they see as an outcome, right? And so instead of spoon feeding what we are, I need to find out what that person is first. And so I would have very much changed the conversation in the interview to one of just more discovery about this person rather than checking off skills and then telling them who we are.
I understand. That makes a lot of sense. I had a principal, I got to sit in on interviews for teacher candidates that they were hiring. She asked to do a really innovative program, which was allowing seniors to do their student teaching as a full year project at her elementary school. And so they would team teach all year with a classroom teacher, and then there would be a gradual release of responsibility at some point so they could solo, as opposed to just going from classroom to classroom and then having this 3-week high stakes, irrelevant teaching so that you could check a box that said you did your student teaching. And so she wanted to find the very best, not just anyone who could do their student teaching. So I sat in on those interviews because this was her innovative idea and it was really smart. And what I saw her do that I had never seen anyone else do, which was before they even interviewed any of the candidates, they walked through the questions that they were going to ask and they came to a shared image of what an ideal answer to that question should be for the culture in their building of what they're trying to create together. And it was just, oh my God, why have I not been why haven't we taken the time to say, we each hear the question, we hear the answer differently, and then we assign a score to it. And then afterwards, we start to haggle about whether or not it was a great answer or not a great answer. What if we had done it from the very beginning to say, what is an ideal answer for this question?
And I'll take you a step further because
Please.
I love that. I love that in ways I can't describe, because in the debrief, then the question you get to ask, because you already have the ideal. How does this person make the ideal better.
Ooh.
And so
Yeah.
now the debrief,
Yeah.
we can even go further with that.
I
So
like
the-
that because
the
then you don't
pre-work.
get mired in the where they
Yep.
fell short in answering it. It's more about, yeah.
Well, and if we are imperfect leaders, we are also imperfect in creating job descriptions and ideal candidates. And so if we believe in the pursuit of better and a constant state of learning after every interview, I should be asking how that candidate could make us better and how the way they answered the questions could make us better.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's a very important part of that process if we're going to continue to grow.
I love it. What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships formed through that experience?
I would take it to a base level and not talk about relationships in that question. What did you learn?
Listen,
That-
I've been doing 4 seasons of that question. So that question is staying, Dan.
That-
No, I'm kidding.
I'm talking for me.
I know.
No,
Sorry. No, wait, hold on. Pursuit is better is we measure the process.
the reality for me is that the basis of that question is the answer. And it's such a good question. It's also the answer for me because I didn't think about relationships, right? And so the answer in this circumstance is that I needed to think more about not only the relationships I wanted, but the relationships that could be created. And so what did I learn about relationships? That they are integral to success. We have this thing where we talk about effort. And this amazing leader comes into one of my workshops. I'm super nervous. He raises his hand and said, Dan, define effort. Working hard? I'll tell you what, it's an equation. It is energy multiplied by time. So just because you put in your hours doesn't mean you're giving me energy. The idea of relationships and healthy relationships increases the energy in any environment, which means we want to give more. We don't have to. We want to. And so in the answer to the question of what did you learn about relationships, they are critical to the environment we work in and the degree to which we can achieve our outcomes.
Yeah, they really do increase the sense of belonging. You look at who is
100%.
running out at 4 o'clock, and not that you want everyone staying. It's just that those who linger, who talk, who share, who wish each other well, who want to stay if they see someone struggling and they say, I can give you a little extra time, or what are you working on? How can I help? Do you need any, those types of things? That really speaks to the organization.
I like to ask the simple question, do you want to be a part of? And then we have the ... delips. But do you want to be a part of? Whether it is, hey, there's a teacher that has tests coming up next week, am I going to stay and help? Yes, because I want to be a part of it. I also know that when it's my turn, they will do the same for me. And those are the relationships and the energy we're trying to create, again, to become this mythical high performer. And so I think that's really an important part. When you talk about what did I learn about relationships, they affect our ability to be great.
In the end, what was something that was good that came out of your experience?
I skinned my knee, Peter, and made a mistake, and my understanding of team development grew exponentially. It was a much more holistic view of creating a team rather than a bunch of people with random skills. And I think I became a better interviewer. Not that I was perfect, because I was a very imperfect leader. But if you were to push me and say, did you get better after that? I would say yes.
Is it fair to add that you leaned into what was probably uncomfortable when you needed to part ways, that you were willing to have a difficult conversation as opposed to allowing something to, I don't know if the word that keeps coming to my head is fester, but it's
It's just not the same word.
The same word, yeah. I mean, because that assigns like a derogatory term, and I don't mean that. It's just that we often want to avoid the conflict, and so we just keep saying, I think I can get better, or I'll keep talking to that person. And I am certainly not assigning that to anyone other than myself as well, of being like, I refuse to give up on people. And sometimes that's my downfall, because I really am hopeful that things will get better.
I think there's great truth in your greatest superpower is also your greatest downfall. And so as we look at that situation, I also tried, it lasted too long. And we had the tough conversation, but in my heart of hearts to this day, many years later, as we're having this conversation, the blame or responsibility still rests on my shoulders. That person was outstanding and very talented and got a job right away, but the responsibility of fitting into our team was on me. And so, again, I still think that the growth moment, probably for both of us, I hope that person learned to ask maybe more intricate questions about the environment they're going to work in, and to say, hey, that was just a wrong fit. It was fine. But hopefully there's growth in being the interviewee as well.
Yeah. What advice would you give to an aspiring leader?
Put on your reading glasses, open up your ears, and learn. I think that leadership is an evolving skill. It has to be done in your voice. And so authenticity in leadership is everything. If you read a book, it's not the answer. It goes into your toolbox. If you come work with me, I will tell you up front, I'm not solving your problems. I'm going to add to your toolbox. It is your responsibility to decide how to implement them. And get more tools, learn, but never apologize or be afraid to be yourself.
Dan, if people want to find you at Story 19 Consulting, how can they do that?
They can email me at dan@mystory19.com or go to my website, www.mystory19.com.
Your website's really engaging. It's quite fun to explore and poke around. Yeah, truly. You spent some time thinking about it. Our guest today was Dan James, the founder of Story 19 Consulting. And Dan, I always write notes as I'm listening to and just engaged with and just thrilled to meet people. For me, it's just the skinned my knee, how you healed, what you learned, and then how you continue to thrive and then share that wisdom with others is really a big takeaway for me. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're back. We're back.
We're back. Do you want to start with your purpose, your moral purpose, and start there? I mean, I think talking a little bit about it would be, I think starting from where we ended on the intro could be helpful to frame some of the technicals of the conversation. I think he names a few things that I think are really great to consider, but I think you always got to start with your why.
Absolutely.
And so what got you to yours here? Why that?
I'm going to start with the quote that really spoke to me.
Sure.
And that sort of compelled me to want to share. He said, what is your ultimate impact? Not in your job, what you are. What is your ultimate impact in this life?
Yeah.
I recognize I was born with blessings, and I was reminded by someone who helped raise me that it's my responsibility to share those blessings with others. And I didn't always understand that until I moved to Oakland, California as a teacher in the Oakland Public Schools and really began to not just see or notice, but be immersed in the inequities in our system and in our society. I mean, just a chasm between rich and poor. And it wasn't something you just drove through, but rather were like regularly observing. And I made so many missteps throughout that time because I just kept saying dumb things that just didn't reflect a real understanding. And I imagine that's something that you notice in your own work when you're working with school districts and teachers. And I come by it honestly in terms of, my growth in that area. So I would say that is what compelled me to come to my moral focus, which was like, wait a second. Not that I'm insinuating that by ending poverty, that means that everybody could have a Eurocentric point of view and follow that sort of train of thinking. My thought was, I want to end poverty so that every family can give their kids every opportunity to do what inspires them, as opposed to having to make really difficult choices or sacrifices perpetually, generation after generation, and leave it really difficult for them to achieve. So I think that's what was, for me, the compelling reason.
I love that. What I love about the statement of ending poverty is you'll fail. Knowing that, but doing it anyway. Because when you do it anyway, you'll actually get farther than if you say, you know what I want to do? I would like to end poverty for these two people in this one part of, like, when you get microscopic in terms of your goal, it may or may not work for those two people, but you're going to make so much more progress by making your moral purpose that large, that ambitious. You'll have more impact. For sure, you'll have more impact.
Yeah. I believe in that ripple effect. So I believe that when I make a decision to invest in something or someone or some issue, if I can give my own time or treasure to it, that there will be a ripple effect that will move us just one step closer to that goal, knowing that there are so many actions and intentional behaviors and system design that are pushing Sisyphus, pushing a rock up a hill. I get it. I understand that.
Yes.
But I'm not going to stop. And I appreciate you reminding me, you're going to fail. And yet you're not going to stop trying because...
No, because I don't know if I can fix that. But what I can do is make it the thing that I work on, that I attribute my actions towards. I'm doing everything in my... When I think about mine, it's hard to narrow down, to be honest. I probably, at the moment, my wording is really around two different things. And one is ending racism. And the other is assuring that public schools are public. they are linked in my mind. I believe if you assure that public schools are public, you can end racism, both of which I seem to be failing quite spectacularly. And I'm clear about however granular I get, I'm clear that I'm doing it for that purpose. And that's, to me, that in some ways is the cascading effect, as Dan talks about, of at least of my focus, which then leads to the leadership actions that I take.
You totally jumped in exactly where I was hoping that I was gonna stitch this comment to what you just said. That Dan, I believe, would refer to both of us in our talking about our actions and that as this cascading effect. So I talked about a ripple effect, but and his quote was, "The art of being a subject matter expert in teaching is vastly different than leading a school system." And there is a disconnect, whether it's business, school district, sports teams in the leadership model, the subject matter expert model, is that this cascading effect is what we're attempting to influence and be a part of.
It's so true. This is why over and over, I mean, even if we just stay in our educational area, we don't go to other arenas, the number of principals that I've met that were not necessarily the strongest teachers, but are really pretty great principals indicates the skill difference that's required here. And it doesn't mean that being a great teacher wouldn't make you a good principal, but there are amazing teachers that actually aren't. That's not theirs. They don't learn how to do it. It is a different skill set. And his idea really resonated for me as someone who's I'm so removed. I am an outside coach to large school systems. The impact I have seems to be so far away. And yet, I think my power comes from being that far away. My power comes, I told this to someone else that I was talking to. My power comes from having no power, zero power. That's where the power is.
You're agitating for change, and they don't see. Those who get to work with you closely know that you have the power to. You don't have power within their system, but you have power to help them aspire.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can ask harder questions because I am not your evaluator, and you could say, "Screw off, Jamie. I'm not interested in talking about that." Totally, that's fine. It doesn't. That is a totally appropriate response to me, as much as the response about your own reflection. They both count. And so I loved both of these. You kind of linked. The other one that I really loved was this concept of expert to leader. It really resonated as someone, a former teacher who got into that, started as a dean. I went from being a teacher to a dean, and I hated it. You do that much discipline, negative reinforcement discipline. It just stank. It felt terrible.
Well, look who's back again. Looks like our last conversation didn't make any kind of impact.
You know it. Or I'd go to the teachers and be like, "What? Help me understand why we're writing him up for the same thing we just wrote him up for yesterday." Well, he did it again. I'm like, I understand that. But if it didn't change his behavior, why would it change his behavior this time?
He needs to get out. Process. I need to teach.
Yeah. It's preventing all of my students from learning. I'm like, oh, really? Every student.
Somebody needs to read Unreasonable Hospitality.
Yeah, I'm glad I don't do that job anymore. So those of you that are deans right now and you are listening, I am impressed by you. If you are good at this job, I'm impressed. I was terrible.
No, we stand in awe of them because they are exceedingly patient.
Exactly.
Anything else that comes to mind?
What about this idea? When he talked about the concept that basically he said everything we say is a story, and that communication is storytelling. And that resonated for me both as someone who likes to tell stories, who loves listening to stories, who loves framing the ideas in story. My brain is very good at linking concepts to real-time stories or old stories that I've told over and over. This idea of that leadership being about telling that story so that people basically have a metaphor for understanding where it is that you're going. That really resonated for me. I don't know if it resonated for you.
Oh, sure. I mean, in the leadership model that I use, the power of language includes storytelling, metaphor, framing, all those types of ways of making a concept and an issue or a point that I'm trying to make just more easily accessible.
Yes, accessible.
And allows us to come back to it later I mean, here's an example. When I was making decisions or talking with my school board about decisions or innovations I was considering, even in a public space, I sometimes created confusion or frustration because they would feel like I was announcing something to the public that hadn't been fully vetted by the board. And what was pointed out to me by a good friend and mentor was, you really need to frame it for them. So I started using butterfly, the life cycle of a butterfly, as a way to do that. Right now, I'm just in a caterpillar stage. I'm just exploring. Or right now, we're in a chrysalis stage, the cocoon. And because we've been talking about this, but now I need to know, what would it look like in 2 years or 5 years? Or how would proponents or opponents talk about this? And then if we're ready to launch and communicate, like, we're in a butterfly stage. And just even that as a metaphor for making system change was really helpful for everyone.
Yeah.
So that it put everybody on the same level of understanding of where do we stand right now in this idea. So whether it's story, like full on story, whether it's anecdote, or whether it's just using like simple metaphor as a way to conjure an image of where we are, is really helpful.
It makes me think of you're talking about taking an idea, and instead of getting technical to what to do, you're talking about having the idea have details that help people better understand the idea, not necessarily what to do yet, but just it was
articulating a process. Yeah. Because when I didn't do that, you would have, particularly with social media, all of a sudden it's like, wait, we're doing this? I didn't know that. And then teachers unions, well, that hasn't been part of our conversations, and we're actively engaged in collective bargaining. Principals are going, well, how are you going to staff that idea? Or who's going to get to lead that? Or I didn't even know. Or whose building is it going to be in? Parents are going, I want to get my kid into that. Whatever it is. It was like, whoa. And the board was right to be frustrated. Hey, man, what are you doing? And so the moment I could say, oh, we're just in a caterpillar stage right now. Oh, great. Let us know where you are next as you progress, and then we'll be able to provide additional feedback.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I am rewatching The West Wing, the show The West Wing.
I'm also doing that. Isn't that wild?
Are you really? Oh,
yeah. I was watching my nephew for a couple of days, and he's doing it with his dad. And so we watched a few episodes, and he was like, how do you know all the lines? I'm like, oh, because you're not my first person to rewatch this with.
This is the first time I rewatched. This is the first time it
we watched the map, the big cheese, the big wheel of cheese.
Big block of cheese day.
And the map. It was talking about the map, and like CJ goes in there, was so like incredulous.
Block of cheese day.
Cannot get over it. Greenland's not. How big is it? Wait. And then, of course, and then talking about Northern Hemisphere versus Southern Hemisphere. And then, but we are on the northern part. There is no north in space. So what would it look like? And Phillips was like, you are blowing my mind.
Exactly. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I actually just got to a special episode, where they interviewed past White House workers and politicians. Kissinger's on there. They interview Kissinger. They interview Gerald Ford. They interview Clinton. They interview, as well as tons of staffers. And what I loved about, I almost skipped it. I was like, I'm kind of into the show. I don't want to watch this. But what I listened to it, and what I loved about it, relating to this storytelling thing, is it made the idea of the White House real. It made these people are just people who were like blown away by the own perception of the White House. So Carter's on there. And Carter's talking about sitting in the Oval Office. And what Carter says is the awe that the office inspired in him, that he is just a guy, and I'm just a man, but I would be sitting in this room that they told me to sit in, and people who are smarter than me would come into the room to share their idea and forget the idea because the room blew them away. The room itself blew them away. And what I loved about his story, and the story of all the other people they interviewed, is that they're giving human details to big ideas. That's what I heard Dan James talking about. That Dan James is saying, to you, I'm ending poverty. Well, ending poverty is almost esoteric. It's so big. You're talking about giving human details, stories, so that people can connect to what it is that they might see in it, how they might connect to it, and thus have a cascading effect.
Love it. Yeah. I mean, in essence, he also, his own quote is in there somewhere. He says something about talking about the pursuit of better. The outcomes are an ancillary benefit of a process of getting better. And so those who enter the room who are smarter than all of us, they help us. When we harvest the collective wisdom, we get better. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed it.
I did too.
All right. Well, you've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And guess what, Jamie? I get to see you again next week.
I will see you next week.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.